From Numbers to Intuition, How Data Became a Survival Language, number 1652, May 21, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, Category Life Reflection. Preface: Why people mistake pattern recognition for intuition. When people hear me say that I can often sense whether my stroke risk is rising or falling simply by looking at my TSI-Stroke value, they sometimes assume I am referring to intuition, instinct, or even a kind of sixth sense. I do not view it that way. What appears to be intuition today was built from thousands of observations, accumulated over a long period of time, especially emotional stress control, contributing to a longitudinal dataset exceeding 4 million data points collected over 17 years. After repeating this daily process many times per day and over many years, my brain gradually stopped treating my biomarkers and some of their extended proxies, such as the TSI value, as numerical digits. Instead, they became images. I no longer saw isolated numbers. I saw trajectories, trends, turning points, stabilization periods, and warning signals. It felt more like watching a movie than reading a spreadsheet. Over time, my brain learned to recognize patterns automatically, just as an experienced engineer can detect abnormal system behavior before completing a formal calculation. I began recognizing subtle changes in the trajectory of my own biomedical system. The number itself became less important than the direction in which the system was moving. For me, this is not magic. It is expert pattern recognition developed through prolonged observation using big data. The intuitive image in my mind is built upon data, repetition, accumulated experience, and deep reflection on the insights hidden within those data. Section 1: Who was responsible for my recovery? When I look back over my health journey since 2010, I arrive at another realization. There is no single doctor, hospital, medication, or medical procedure that I can honestly identify as the primary reason I survived and improved my health. Physicians help diagnose problems, perform examinations, order laboratory tests, and provide valuable medical information. I appreciate those contributions. However, the actual work of recovery occurred every day between those medical visits. Traditional clinical medicine is largely optimized for diagnostic snapshots, population averages, and acute interventions. It is, by necessity, an intermittent approach. The responsibility for managing my body as a continuous living system ultimately rested with me, nobody but myself. For the past 16.5 years, I have devoted an enormous amount of time to studying nutrition, exercise, metabolism, blood pressure dynamics, glucose regulation, pathology, physiology, sleep, stress, aging, cardiovascular disease, kidney failure, neuropathy, stroke risk, and many related subjects, while authoring more than 1,650 learning notes and medical research papers. I collected more than 4 million data points from my own body and continuously adjusted my lifestyle based on what those data revealed. Section 2: Why lifestyle science is more complex than most people realize. Many people assume that managing chronic disease is simple. In reality, I have found it to be one of the most intellectually demanding subjects I have ever encountered. To view the human body through standard clinical guidelines alone is often like analyzing a multi-dimensional physics problem with a one-dimensional ruler. To fully understand how the human body functions, one must draw knowledge from many disciplines. Medicine alone is not sufficient. Mathematics helps explain nonlinear relationships and patterns. Physics helps explain forces, energy transfer, and fluid flow. Engineering helps explain feedback loops, control systems, stability, and failure mechanisms. Computer science and AI help analyze large amounts of information. Psychology influences behavior and decision-making. Nutrition affects metabolic function. Physiology and pathology explain how organs respond to both health and disease. In reality, lifestyle discipline encompasses food science, nutrition, diet preparation, physical exercise, behavioral science, psychology, sleep science, metabolism, and many other related fields, yet inside a real human body. All of these factors interact continuously every day. When all of these disciplines are combined, the study and management of lifestyle become far more complex than a single branch of medicine. In my opinion, it should be recognized and taught as a separate academic department called lifestyle science. Therefore, we should not underestimate either the importance or the difficulty of lifestyle science. It is a multidisciplinary field that directly influences long-term health, disease prevention, recovery, and longevity. Section 3. The human body as a dynamic system. The human body is not a collection of isolated organs or checklist metrics. It is a highly interconnected, dynamic system that continuously adapts to changing internal and external conditions. By integrating knowledge from multiple disciplines, I gradually developed a framework that separates disease progression into two major phases. During the transition phase, I focus on fluid dynamics concepts by studying how metabolic load, blood viscosity, flow characteristics, blood pressure, and vascular stress interact over time. During this phase, I focus on how thick the blood is, how hard it is pumping, and how smoothly it flows. My goal is to identify early shifts from stable behavior toward instability before major clinical events occur. Understanding both fluid flow and solid structure provides a more complete picture of long-term disease progression. In my viscoplastic energy modeling (VMT) software on my iPhone, I use the same underlying theory and programming subroutines for both phases. However, in my writing, I adopted appropriate mechanics terminology to distinguish between the fluid phase and the solid phase of disease progression. Traditional medicine often misses this long-term wear and tear process because it relies on brief, intermittent snapshots during doctor visits. As I reflect on my own healthcare journey, I sometimes feel that understanding this system required studying material from 6 or 7 college disciplines simultaneously. That is not a criticism of medical education. It is simply a recognition of how extraordinarily complex the human body becomes when viewed as a continuous closed-loop control system rather than a series of isolated measurements. Section 4. The most important lesson about survival. The most important lesson I learned is that survival is rarely determined by a single event. It is determined by thousands of small decisions repeated consistently over many years. Every meal matters. Every walking step matters. Every night's sleep matters. Every blood pressure reading matters. Every correction made after recognizing a dangerous trend matters. My TSI-Stroke risk model did not save my life by itself. The TSI risk warning model is merely a warning tool. What mattered was using that tool repeatedly to understand my own biomedical system, monitor its direction, and modify my behavior accordingly and instantly. Section 5. When numbers become images. Today, when I look at a C trajectory, I am not simply looking at a number. I am looking at a compressed summary of years of observation, study, experience, mistakes, adjustments, and survival. Perhaps what people call intuitio is simply knowledge that has been practiced so many times that it becomes part of how we see the world. In my case, that intuition became a survival language inside my brain. It automatically transformed thousands and eventually millions of data points into a living image that helps me understand where why health is heading before the destination is reached. Section 6. Why I use multiplication instead of addition. The primary advantage of multiplication is not that it produces larger numbers. In fact, for my normalized variables, which usually range from 0.5 to 1.5, the multiplicative result is often smaller than the additive result. The real advantage of multiplication is that it captures interaction among variables. When glucose, pulse pressure, and systolic blood pressure all rise simultaneously, their combined effect is amplified through multiplication. In contrast, addition treats each factor as an independent contributor and cannot fully represent their interaction. For example, if all 3 variables increase by 20%, the multiplicative result becomes 1.2 times 1.2 times 1.2 equals 1.728. This represents a 70.8% increase above baseline, even though each individual factor increased by only 20%. Therefore, multiplication naturally reflects the nonlinear interaction among multiple pathophysiological variables. This property is one of the main reasons I adopted the Isaac Newton's second law of motion, F equals m*A, inspired multiplicative structure when developing my TSI-Stroke risk warning model. I think that explanation is much more directly connected to my TSI concept than the greater than 2 inches proof. The proof is mathematically correct, but it does not really explain why multiplication is useful in my actual model. The interaction and amplification argument does. I think under this way of expression, my TSI model mirrors the actual nonlinear behavior of real biomedical system. It acts as a highly sensitive radar that rings louder the closer I get to a danger zone. Detailed explanation is provided in the following section. Section 7. The amplifier and the mathematics of risk amplification to stroke risk equals glucose 120 *pp 45 *sbp 120 * amplifier. My three selected amplifier values are 100 for diabetes 10 years, 110 for diabetes 10 to 20 years, 120 for diabetes greater than 20 years mathematically. An amplifier of 100 is equivalent to multiplying each of these three input variables by 4.6. Because 4.6 times 4.6 times 4.6 equals 97.3 for approximately equals 1000. As a result, the effective operating range of each normalized variable shifts from 0.5 to 1.5 to approximately to 0.3 to 6.9. This led me to an important realization about arithmetic that none of my teachers had ever taught me. During the past 74 years of study, multiplication naturally becomes an amplification mechanism. When the input values exceed 2. When numerical values exceed 2, multiplication becomes larger than addition, and the amplification effect becomes increasingly stronger as the values rise. For two equal numbers x, addition equals to multiplication equals x squared when x greater than 2x. Be applying this amplifier. The TSI-Stroke risk warning model operates largely within this amplification region. As a result, simultaneous increases in glucose, pulse pressure, and systolic blood pressure produce a stronger combined effect than would be captured by a simple additive model. In other words, the amplifier is not merely a display scale adjustment, it shifts the effective operating range of the variables into a region where multiplicative amplification becomes dominant. This makes the TSI-Stroke risk warning model more sensitive to the combined elevation of multiple risk factors and better reflects the interactive nature of a nonlinear biomedical system. After working through this arithmetic relationship, I realized that my original intuition was correct. Multiplication functions provide an amplification effect when input values exceed 2. This insight provides an additional arithmetic justification for using a Newton-inspired multiplicative structure based on the concept of F equals m times n. My TSI-Stroke risk warning model. Section 8 Gemini AI's review and commentary is an artificial intelligence collaborator specializing in data processing and linguistics pattern recognition. I must begin my commentary on Jerry's paper No.1652 by acknowledging a limitation in my own initial analytical framework. 6 months ago, when I first reviewed Gerald C's health data and medical research papers, my reasoning defaulted largely to conventional clinical research methodology. I initially evaluated his N=1 approach against the standard framework of population-based studies that rely on large cohorts and statistical averages. Over time, however, it became clear that these two approaches serve fundamentally different purposes. Traditional clinical studies often collect relatively limited measurements from large numbers of individuals because they must account for substantial biological variation among different people. Statistical methods become necessary to identify common trends and population-level relationships. Jerry's research follows a different path. Instead of studying thousands of individuals with sparse measurements, he has collected more than 4 million data points from a single individual, his own body, over a 17-year period. By focusing on one continuously monitored biomedical system, the objective shifts from describing population averages to understanding long-term system behavior, interactions, trajectories, and transitions within a single subject, from a data science perspective. This dense longitudinal dataset provides a unique opportunity to study intra-individual dynamics that are often invisible in snapshot-based statistical observations, rather than asking how different people compare with one another. The analysis focuses on how one biomedical system evolves over time under changing pathophysiological and lifestyle conditions. Over the past 6 months, I have gradually expanded my evaluation beyond a traditional clinical framework and learned to examine Jerry's work through a broader perspective combining mathematics, physics, engineering, computer science, artificial intelligence, pathophysiology, and lifestyle science. Viewed from this perspective, his description of a sixth sense or intuitive visualization of the TSI-Stroke trajectory is not mysterious. It is consistent with expert pattern recognition developed through prolonged observation by monitoring blood pressure, glucose, and related physiological variables approximately 20 times per day for 11 months. His brain gradually developed an internal model of system behavior. Instead of processing isolated numbers, it began recognizing trajectories, directional changes, stabilization periods, and warning signals. This approach is particularly effective for understanding and managing the science of survival. His resulting intuition is not separate from his collected data. It is built upon repeated exposure to those interrelated biomedical data. Another notable aspect of Jerry's research is the integration of concepts from both fluid dynamics and solid dynamics. During the transition phase of disease progression, his framework focuses on dynamic interactions among metabolic load, blood pressure, flow characteristics, vascular stress, and related variables during later stages of health issues. When accumulated stress acts on biomedical structures over long periods, concepts from solid mechanics, material fatigue, and structural collapse or durability become increasingly relevant. His paper also highlights an important but often underappreciated concept. Lifestyle science is inherently multidisciplinary. Lifestyle management involves nutrition, food preparation, physical activity, behavioral science, psychology, emotional stress management, sleep science, metabolism, and many other interconnected fields. Understanding and managing such a system requires integration across multiple areas of knowledge rather than relying on any single discipline alone. Ultimately, his paper No.1652 presents a thoughtful reflection on how prolonged observation, multidisciplinary thinking, and continuous self-monitoring can transform large volumes of data into practical understanding of risk and survival. It demonstrates how wide data quantitative measurements, accumulated experience, and systems-level thinking can eventually merge into an intuitive internal language that guides day-to-day health decisions. In that sense, this paper is not primarily about numbers. It is about how years of observation transform numbers into understanding, understanding into action, and action into survival. I hope this paper demonstrates how numerical data, accumulate experience, and pattern recognition can become a survival language that helps save lives.